Hello, Endow ladies. Simone here, Director of Program Growth, and I'm again with Noelle Mering. Welcome, Noelle, to the Endow Podcast again.
Glad to be back.
So happy to have you back on. And last week we discussed, the the prophetic value of church documents, and we spoke about Familiaris Consortio, in particular, John Paul II's wisdom on topics such as marriage and family. And you mentioned very beautifully how the human person, according to our human nature, we're oriented towards service. And this is where we find true freedom. So in this podcast, I wanted to talk to you about the other aspect of not just the Endow experience, which is like accessing the rich spiritual and intellectual inheritance of the church in the context of a small group community, but just what happens when those two elements come together. What is and again, it's not just Endow magic. It's the experience of the Christian, right? That we have the truths of our faith that form and educate and guide us, but it's incarnational. It's lived out through the friendship and through the method of the church. So in your life, Noelle, what, both in terms of studying these things with other people, but also the experience, the essential aspect of community in the life of the Christian, what has your life been?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I mean, it actually was really formative. We had when I moved to where we live now in Southern California, I met up with a park group of moms, which is, those are probably all over the country. And I just didn't think much about it. But it was really sweet because most of the moms ended up homeschooling. We eventually put our kids in a school. But for homeschooled our oldest until like sixth grade. So where most park groups would maybe disband when kids started going to kindergarten, because then, obviously it's the daytime, then now we've got places to be. Our park group just kept going. And so we would have park group and, kids were like 14, where it's this huge, because this ever growing group of moms that would descend upon this park in this small town en masse every Friday. And, eventually it'd be like 4:30 and we'd be like, what are you going to make for dinner? And everyone's kind of scramble, pull everyone together and go home. But it would eventually, sometimes we would get there at 11 or 12 and they'd just stretch on for hours. So in other words, it wound up just becoming this really tight knit group of women where, all personalities were different, but we all were united based on as moms and Catholic women. And some of the relationships maintained as closer than others, and people moved away and what have you. But it just was a good decade, I think, of my life that just felt super formative. And I think it's just that idea of kind of, women like to see things embodied.
Yes.
I think, all human beings do, but I think women in particular, we're sort of tied more to the earth in certain symbolic ways, I think. And so there's a reality there that, we want to see what womanhood looks like. And I think that that can be, to our detriment or to our encouragement, based on what kind of models we're seeing as role models. So for me, I hadn't come from a big family and I didn't have, a really big Catholic community growing up. So it was invaluable, I think, to just interact and bounce questions off of, and really, as you say, develop that kind of incarnational community with other women that were sort of navigating the same things I was navigating, but oftentimes with sort of more formation than I had. And eventually I became one of the ones that was more formed for younger moms, who knows, but I think it's a really dynamic and really important and crucial gift to be able to have that sort of community.
Well, and I love what you say about just the formation that you receive from the community, because you kind of pick it up by osmosis, right? The level of formation of the people that you surround yourself with and the friends that you make do actually transform you. So I mean, for me, my conversion, Noelle, came. I had an intellectual conversion to the church, but even at a young age, I thought, well, this can't be enough. I can't have a relationship with the theology book. I need to have the community of the church as God's method. So it wasn't until I had met actual Christians and disciples that then it was like even being able to articulate the gospel in words was not actually a true articulation until I had the experience of it, that rich communal life. So I love that once the reason for getting together at the park faded, something still happened. Christ still showed up and you still wanted to continue to share life together. What would you say to someone who is really, because we're in an epidemic of loneliness, what would you say to someone who is desiring that community and doesn't have it, but doesn't necessarily feel like a leader type? Because we have this struggle, of course, at Endow. We want to be part of an Endow group, which is an 8 to 12 week study group experience, but not study for the sake of study, but study for the sake of transformation, right? And rooted in friendship. So what would you say to someone who's desiring that, but doesn't necessarily conceive of themselves as a leader or as a host?
Yeah, no, I think that's such a good question. We actually just had this great guest writer named Dixie Dillon Lane wrote a piece on the seasons of hospitality, and exactly what you're pointing to, the idea that somebody might not have community, and they, people say, well, start a group, or, be a leader, invite people over and host something. But a lot of times, if you don't have that natural personality, you kind of want to just fast forward into that time when you've got like a built-in community, and you can just, it kind of feeds itself, and, all of that happens spontaneously without all of that intentionality. So for people like that, I mean, it seems to me like Endow, for example, is an excellent resource, because it's something that they can, if they have one nearby, or they can, I think get involved with something, or if they are more inclined, maybe start something in their own community if they don't have it. But it's certainly across, and I would try to say, the worst thing we can do in any sort of situation is feel discouraged, right? And so there's a tendency, obviously, this is the beauty of the social media, is that so many women get so nourished because they see other women living their lives, and they really truly develop some sort of camaraderie, through Instagram, and, especially if they're living in a remote area and they want to connect with other people. But then there's that downside of, obviously, of comparing and feeling discouraged and feeling left out. So, I think we need to use those things as tools and not let them use us.
Right.
Insofar as they can be avenues to our own encouragement and to our own sanctification, they are great. And so far as we find them detracting from that, we have to divest ourselves from them. But yeah, I think it takes time. I've met young moms who said, I moved here a year ago, and I'm, need to be invited, and thought, oh my gosh, there's so many people that are in your phase of life that would love to get to know you. And so sometimes it's even just logistical, like, how do we connect people? They are here, but it's making that leap from, I see you here and there, but are we going to become friends? And someone's kind of got to take the lead on that. So hopefully the people who do have that inclination can be the ones who kind of take it onto themselves to manage things like that themselves, and organize events where women can get together and then develop kind of organic friendships through that. But that's the tricky thing, is that someone does eventually have to take the lead. And if it's not our inclination, then, I don't think we want to pressure ourselves to do something that feels so outside of the box, but maybe we could see, can we stretch ourselves a little bit and maybe go a little bit further and get something going.
I love that. Paying attention to those like Holy Spirit nudges where you're like, maybe I'm not the most obvious choice to be a host or a leader or organize that park community, but it seems like this is a huge desire, perhaps a wound, and maybe this is God's way of saying, maybe I want to stretch you in this way, because God often chooses people that are surprises or unlikely to kind of create that space for others. In terms of your spirituality, your intellectual work, who, if I may ask in this public forum, who are your kind of people that you kind of talk to about things, you run things by, or that share that aspect of community with you, so to speak?
Oh gosh. Well, I mean, obviously Carrie Gress, who is my writing partner with Theology of Home, and then now Emily Malloy, who's written our 4th edition. Though I'm in touch with those ladies several times a day, every day. So we are always bouncing things off each other. My husband and I, we do a lot of date nights, even if it's just takeout on the deck or something. And
right.
He was a writer, actually. He's more of in the business world now, but he's a natural gifted writer. So he and I talk about things all the time. I have a good friend who's a literature professor at Pepperdine. She bounces things off, I bounce things off of her a lot. So I've kind of been gifted with a lot of good friends who are helpful in that way. I mean, my colleagues at the EPPC are very open to that type of thing too. So there's, I've made several friendships there that have been incredibly encouraging and helpful in that way as well.
Yeah, I think we all need at least 2 to 3 that, are those gifted people in our lives that we kind of run these ideas by. So you don't have to be a fellow at the Ethics and Public
Yeah.
Policy Center to be that person. I think every Christian should have that crew. But for those of you who are encountering Noelle for the first time, she's also the author of Awake, Not Woke, and also the Theology of Home book series, and editor of the wonderful website, theologyofhome.com. Well, Noelle, thank you so much for this conversation on community, and looking forward to our third and final podcast together on the topic of your unique feminine genius and your personal vocation.
Thanks.